بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. So we welcome you back to the second day of the two-day intensive seminar on the 6 books of Hadith: Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Sunan Abi Dawud, Jami'ah at-Tirmidhi, Sunan an-Nasai, and Sunan Ibn Majah, and their authors' methodologies. And we had left off yesterday at the end of Sahih Muslim. We had covered yesterday 2 books from these 6 books, Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, in which we studied extremely brief biographies of these 2 great Imams, Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim, and studied some important methodological aspects of these books, Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and that which distinguishes them from the other books of Hadith. And today we will start, inshallah, with the 3rd book from these 6 books of Hadith, which is Sunan Abi Dawud. And we will try, inshallah, to complete the remaining 4 books today. The 4 books, the Sunan al-Arba', Sunan Abi Dawud, Jami'ah at-Tirmidhi, Sunan an-Nasai, and Sunan Ibn Majah, to the best of our ability. And we might leave off some of the points that we wanted to mention in order to complete these 4 books in the time that has been allocated, inshallah. So we start off with the book Sunan Abi Dawud, and as always we will start off with a brief, extremely brief biography of Imam Abu Dawud. His name, or his kunya, is Abu Dawud. His name is Sulaiman ibn al-Ash'ath ibn Ishaq al-Azdi al-Sijistani. Sulaiman ibn al-Ash'ath ibn Ishaq al-Azdi al-Sijistani. Al-Azdi is ascription to the tribe of Al-Azd, and it is an Arabic tribe that lives in the country of Yemen. So Imam Abu Dawud, even though he lived in non-Arab lands of Khurasan, but he is originally an Arab, from the Arabs that made migration to these lands after they became Islamic lands and settled in them. And he is similar, as we said, to Imam Muslim, who was also an Arab, Qushayri, from the tribe of Qushayr. And this is indifferent to Imam al-Bukhari, rahimahullah, who we said that one of his great grandfathers was the one who accepted Islam. And as-Sijistani is an ascription to the area of Sijistan, which is a vast area, and it has been split up today amongst 2 countries primarily, or 3 countries. A small part of it is also in a 3rd country. The 2 primary countries are Afghanistan and Iran. Afghanistan and Iran. And a small part of it also falls in Turkmenistan. Imam Abu Dawud al-Sijistani, rahimahullah, was born in the year 202 after the Hijrah, 202 in Sijistan. And since we are talking about his ascription to Sijistan, from the benefits is that some of the scholars of Hadith, they were known by their kunya. Some of them were known by their names. Some of them were known by their ascriptions to the cities they lived in. Some of them were known by their alqab, by their nicknames. So if we just look at the 6 books of Hadith, we find all these categories present with us. So Imam al-Bukhari, for example, he is known by the ascription to his city, Sahih al-Bukhari. He's known by ascription to his city of Bukhara. Imam Muslim is known by his name, Sahih Muslim. Most people won't say Sahih al-Qushayri, for example, Sahih al-Nisaburi, or Sahih Abil Hussein. They will say Sahih Muslim. So he is more famous by his name. Imam Bukhari is more famous by his ascription to his city. Imam Abu Dawud is more famous by his kunya. So you won't find people saying Sunan al-Sijistani or Sunan Sulaiman, but he is famous by his kunya, Sunan Abi Dawud. An-Nasai is famous by ascription to his city. Ibn Majah is famous by ascription to his laqab, his nickname, as we'll discuss. This is a nickname of one of his fathers or grandfathers that we'll mention inshallah. So he's known by his ascription to his nickname. And Tirmidhi is known by ascription to his city. So these are various ways that the muhaddithin are known. Imam Abu Dawud, as we said, was born in Sijistan in the year 202 after the Hijrah, and he started seeking the knowledge of hadith from a young age, like all of the muhaddithin. And he started gathering the hadith of the scholars of his area, the muhaddithin of Sijistan. And as we said, this is also from the sunnah and the way of the muhaddithin, that they will first listen hadith from the scholars of the area before traveling to other areas. After which he traveled to the various other cities in Khurasan, such as Nisabur, Maro, Balkh, Herat, and etc. And he entered Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate at that time, when he was only 18 years of age. So this means that he started seeking ilm al-hadith from a very young age. First he heard hadith from the scholars of his city or area, Sijistan, then from the several cities in Khurasan, and he had finished listening to them, and then he entered Baghdad and he was only 18 years of age. So this shows that he started seeking the knowledge of hadith from a very young age. And in Iraq he entered, after Baghdad, al-Basra and al-Kufa. Then he traveled to al-Sham, the countries today of Syria and Jordan and Palestine and Lebanon. And he lived in Sham for a very long period of time, seeking the knowledge of hadith. And he entered Damascus, and he did not leave off a city in Sham that had muhaddithin in it, except that he entered it and heard hadith from these muhaddithin. To the point that he traveled to the farthermost boundaries of the Islamic Caliphate and nation, Tartus, which was on the border of the Roman nation and Roman Empire, which today, as we said, is Turkey, the country of Turkey. And he lived there for a long period of time, learning hadith and spreading it. He also traveled to Egypt, Misr, and of course to Al-Hijaz, Al-Haramain, Mecca and Medina. If you can switch to this is the area of Sijistan, as we said, the vast area of Sijistan that falls in the countries of Afghanistan, Iran and Turkmenistan. And today it is called also Sistan. Instead of Sijistan, Sistan. And as we said, the description to it is Sijistani, but it is also said Sijzi. It is also said Sijzi. As you can see at the bottom there, Sijistani wa al-Sijzi. And this is something that is known in Arabic to oppose the qaida, the principle. In Arabic, ascription is made to something by adding the letter ya at the end of it. The letter ya at the end of it. So the one who ascribes to Medina will be called al-Madani. The one who ascribes to Makkah will be called al-Makki. The one who ascribes, for example, to a way, a madhab, to the way of the Salaf, he will be called as-Salafi. To the one who ascribes to al-Athar will be called al-Athari. But there are some ascriptions that are not on this principle. So a Sijistan, the ascription to it can also be al-Sijzi. A-Sijzi. And this is just like we mentioned Ar-Rai, the capital of Iran, Tehran. The ascription to it is Ar-Razi. So this is in opposition to the principle, Ar-Razi. The next image, this is the vast travels of Imam Abu Dawud as-Sijistani rahimahullah in seeking the knowledge of hadith. He was born in this area, Sijistan. He sought the ilm al-hadith in the various cities of Khurasan that we mentioned, Nisabur, Maro, Ar-Rai, Jurjan, Qazwin, etc. that fall in Iran today. Then he entered the capital city of Iraq, Baghdad, and he sought knowledge from the various other cities of Iraq, Kufa, Basra, Samarra. Then he entered Al-Hijaz to Mecca and Medina, from where he went to Sham, living in Sham for a long period of time. So he sought the ilm al-hadith in Baytul Maqdis in Palestine, in Damascus, Syria, Damascus, to the point he went to the furthermost border of the Roman or the Islamic nation, the Roman Empire, Tartus, in which he lived for a long period of time, seeking the knowledge of hadith and disseminating it. And Tartus today is known by the same name. Tartus today is known by the same name, and it is a small city that falls in furthermost Syria, right at the border of Turkey. And he also, as we said, traveled to Misr, seeking the knowledge of hadith. And in these travels he heard from the great muhaddithin that were alive at that time in these cities. From them Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So from the major scholars that he learned hadith from and listened from was Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Imam Yahya ibn Ma'in and Imam Ishaq ibn Rahuya and Imam Musaddad ibn Musarhad and other than them. And the oldest sheikh of his, the first sheikh that he heard hadith from, is a muhaddith by the name of Muslim ibn Ibrahim al-Azdi. Muslim ibn Ibrahim al-Azdi. That is the oldest sheikh of his, and upon whose authority he narrated one hadith thulathi in Sunan Abi Dawud. I want to mention a benefit here, that the ahadith, the ulama have split them or mentioned that they can be split according to the chain, the narrators that are mentioned in his chains. So a hadith can be thulathi, meaning that between the author and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam there are only three narrators, only three narrators. And it can be rubai, meaning between the author and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam there are four narrators. It can be khumasi, sudasi. So the shorter the chain, the more beloved this hadith is to the muhaddithin, because they used to always search for al-ulu, a chain that is the shortest chain. The muhaddithin used to travel far away lands like these just to hear the hadith that they have memorized, they have with them, but it is from a longer chain. They might narrate it with 4 or 5 narrators between them and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they would travel to faraway lands to hear it, so that it could be with just 3 narrators between them and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. If they heard about a sheikh who's an old sheikh who heard this hadith in his youth from his sheikh, so this will make the links become shorter. So they would travel to listen these kind of ahadith. So Imam Abu Dawud, he only has one thulathi hadith in his sunan. The highest hadith that he has in his sunan is thulathi, and it is only 1 in number. All the remaining hadith are rubai or less than it. There are 4 narrators or more. Or he only has one hadith that has 3 narrators between him and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Regarding thulathiyat, the ulama compiled these thulathiyat. These are hadith that only have 3 narrators between the authors and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they compiled this in their books. So we say that Imam Bukhari, he has the most thulathiyat from all of the remaining scholars, the 6 scholars of hadith. The number of thulathiyat he has is 22 in number. He has 22 ahadith that only have 3 narrators between him and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as we said, Sunan Abi Dawud, Abu Dawud has 1 thulathi hadith. Tirmidhi also only has 1 thulathi hadith. The highest he has is thulathi, and it is only 1 in number. Ibn Majah has 5 thulathi ahadith. He has 5 ahadith that have between him and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam only 3 narrators, but all these 5 ahadith are with the same isnad. He heard it from the same sheikh, who heard it from the same sheikh, who heard it from the same sahabi on the authority of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As far as Imam Muslim and Nasai, then they have no thulathiyat. Imam Muslim in Sahih Muslim and an-Nasai in Sunan an-Nasai, they have no thulathiyat. The highest they have is rubaiyat, 4 narrators between them and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They have no thulathiyat. And the number of scholars that Imam Abu Dawud narrated upon in his book As-Sunan are 449 in number. He has narrated upon 449 shuyukh in Sunan Abi Dawud, which is without a doubt a very large number. It is a very large number. He has narrated on 449 shuyukh just in his book As-Sunan, Sunan Abi Dawud. And some of the scholars have authored books in gathering the names of the shuyukh of Sunan of Imam Abi Dawud. Just as we mentioned, some of the scholars have gathered the names of the shuyukh of Imam al-Bukhari and Imam Muslim. We mentioned some of those books. So from them is Al-Imam Abu Ali al-Ghassani al-Jayyani. Abu Ali al-Ghassani al-Jayyani, he has authored the book gathering the shuyukh of Imam Abi Dawud, which he has titled Tasmiyat Shuyukh Abi Dawud. Tasmiyat Shuyukh Abi Dawud. As far as the students of Imam Abi Dawud, then they are vast in number. From the most famous of them is Imam at-Tirmidhi and Imam an-Nasai. As we say always, we always stress the point of the continuous chain of narration. Imam Bukhari's student was Imam Muslim. From the students of Imam Muslim was Tirmidhi, for example. Now we find that from the students of Abu Dawud is Tirmidhi and Nasai. So continuous chain of narration. Also from his students is Imam Abu Awana al-Isfarayini and Ibn Abi Dunya, and other than them from the great Huffaz and Muhaddithin of this ummah. As far as the praise of the scholars upon Imam Abi Dawud, there's a very well-known statement that Imam Ibrahim al-Harbi mentioned regarding Abu Dawud, that the ulama have always mentioned in their books, which is that ulina li Abi Dawud al-Hadithu kama ulina li Dawud al-Hadidu. Ulina li Abi Dawud al-Hadithu kama ulina li Dawud al-Hadidu. That just like Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala made metal and steel soft for Dawood alayhi salam, Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala made hadith and the science of hadith soft for Imam Abu Dawud. As we all know from the mu'jizat of Dawood alayhi salam was that Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala made metal and iron soft for him. As he has mentioned in the Quran, وَأَلَنَّا لَهُ الْحَدِيدِ, that Allah Ta'ala made metal and iron soft for Dawood. So similarly, the ulama mentioned that just like for Dawood, metal was made soft, for Abu Dawud, hadith was made soft for him. It was easy for him. He was created for this. From the praises on Imam Abu Dawud is the statement of Imam Abu Hatim al-Busti. Who is Abu Hatim al-Busti? Huh? Some of the students, they get mixed up and they say he's Ar-Razi. Abu Hatim, they say he's Razi because he's the most famous one by his kunya, Abu Hatim Ar-Razi. Most people don't even know his name. They say that if Abu Hatim is said, they say he's Ar-Razi. But there's also another great muhaddith who has the same kunya, but he's not well known by it, Abu Hatim al-Busti, who is Imam Ibn Hibban. Imam Ibn Hibban, the great muhaddith who has great books in hadith, as-Sahih, Sahih Ibn Hibban, as-Thiqat, Majruhin, etc. So his kunya is also Abu Hatim al-Busti, ascription to the city of Bust, which is in Afghanistan today. He was from this city. So he says about Abu Dawud that Abu Dawud ahad a'immat ad-dunya fiqhan wa ilman wa hifdhan. Imam Abu Dawud is one of the imams of the dunya, imams of the world, in fiqh and in knowledge and in hifd, in memorization. As far as the death of Imam Abu Dawud, he passed away in the city of Al-Basra. He passed away in the city of Al-Basra in Iraq, far away from the city that he was from or born in this city, Al-Basra, in the year 275 after the Hijrah. 275 after the Hijrah. So he was born in 202, passed away in 275, so he lived for a period of 73 years. He lived for a period of 73 years. As far as for his books, then of course from the most famous of them is Sunan Abi Dawud, that we will talk about in detail. From his books is the book of Al-Marasil, in which he has gathered the ahadith that the tabi'een narrate on the authority of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So there's a break in the chain of narration. He has gathered just these ahadith that the tabi'een narrate on the authority of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And also from his books is Su'alat Abi Dawud li Ahmad fi Jarh al-Ruwad wa Ta'dilihim. The questions that he asked his sheikh and his teacher Imam Ahmad regarding narrators of hadith in praise and disparagement of him. So his questions and the answers of Imam Ahmad are compiled in this book. Similarly, from the books is Su'alat Abi Ubaid al-Ajurri Aba Dawud al-Sijistani fil Jarh wa Ta'dil. Just like he asked questions to his sheikh Imam Ahmad, one of his students of Imam Abi Dawud, Abu Ubaid al-Ajurri, he also asked questions to Imam Abu Dawud regarding praise and disparagement of narrators of hadith, which he compiled in this book. Su'alat, questions amongst the scholars, was a well-known science near the scholars of hadith. Most of them, they have these questions, answers that they have answered regarding ahadith, regarding narrators of ahadith, regarding hidden defects in ahadith that the ulama have compiled. Imam Yahya ibn Ma'in has a lot of su'alat that are published that various students of his have asked. Imam Tirmidhi has asked Imam Bukhari several questions that he has mentioned their answers in his book Jami', in which Imam Bukhari has spoken about ahadith and narrators. We will mention that when we come to Jami' Tirmidhi. So these are some of the well-known books of Imam Abu Dawud al-Sijistani. From the well-known books, we will mention that specifically is a book or small treatise called Risalat Abi Dawud ila Ahli Makkah fi Wasf Sunani. The treatise of Abu Dawud to the people of Makkah in description of his book As-Sunan. So as we said, that we can find the methodology of the scholars of hadith in several ways, from the title, from the introduction they have themselves written. From the ways we mentioned was a treatise that these scholars themselves have written in explanation of their methodology. So this is an example. Imam Abu Dawud was asked by the scholars of hadith in Makkah to talk about his book.
You said Imam Ajuri is Imam Abu Dawud's student?
Abu Ubaid. Abu Ubaid al-Ajurri. So, no, he's different. Sharia. He's different than him. Different one. So the scholars of Makkah asked him to explain or talk about his book. When they heard about that Imam Abu Dawud has authored a book of Sunan, so they asked him to explain his methodology and his conditions. So he read this treatise, and we'll mention a lot from this treatise in the coming chapters, inshallah. This is what relates to the biography of Imam Abu Dawud. Then we move on, inshallah, to his Sunan. And we will start off, as always, talking about when he authored this book, Sunan Abi Dawud. So it seems that he authored this book at a very young age, or he started authoring this book at a very young age. We have a narration here that says that he, after authoring this book, he presented it to his sheikh and his teacher, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, rahimahullah. He presented the book Sunan to his teacher, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who reviewed it, who checked it, and he deemed it a good book. He deemed it a good book. And this also, from ways of benefit, is that it is befitting for a student of knowledge to refer back to the scholars, to present his works to them so they can review it. And as we said, Imam Bukhari did this, Imam Muslim did this, and now we find that Imam Abu Dawud also did this. He referred back to Imam Ahmad, presented his book to him, who reviewed it and saw that it was a good book. And we said that Imam Ahmad passed away in what year? 241. 241. So from this we can derive, or try to derive, the date that Imam Dawud finished authoring his book or started authoring his book. So we say that, we will say that Imam Abu Dawud presented the book as-Sunan to Imam Ahmad, for example, 5 years before his death. 5 years before his death. Why do we say 5 years? Why do we not say the same year he passed away or a year before? Because as is known, Imam Ahmad was tested. He was tested in the later part of his life. And the last few years of his life, he was ordered to stay at home, away from everybody. He was ordered to live alone, in seclusion, away from everybody. So it is not possible in those last few years that anyone could have traveled to him or met him or presented this kind of book to him. So we will say, for example, that Abu Dawud presented this book to Imam Ahmad 5 years before his death. So, for example, we'll say that he presented it in 236, 5 years before the death of Imam Ahmad, in 241. And we said that he was born in 202, Imam Abu Dawud. So that means that he finished authoring as-Sunan at what age? 34. He finished authoring this great book at the age of 34. And he himself, or we can also say that he might have taken 10 years in authoring this book. 10 years in authoring this book. Why do we say that? Because we mentioned that Imam Bukhari himself mentioned that I spent 16 years in authoring Sahih al-Bukhari. Imam Muslim himself said I spent 15 years in authoring Sahih Muslim. And as we said, those books contain all types of ahadith. They are from the Jawami, Kutub al-Jawami. But Sunan, as we'll mention, it only contains ahadith of al-Ahkam, al-Fiqh. So we say that he might have taken 10 years for authoring this book. So if we deduce 10 from 34, that gives us 24. So a rough estimate that Imam Abu Dawud rahimahullah started authoring this book when he was only 24 years of age. When he was only 24, so give and take a few years. This is a rough estimate, just to give an idea. He might have started authoring this book at a very young age, 24 years of age, or give and take a year or two. And he authored this book from a collection of 500,000 ahadith that he had written by his own hand. In this vast travels of his, he had written 500,000 ahadith from the great scholars of this lands, and from those 500,000 ahadith, he extracted and compiled the book as-Sunan. And he himself mentions, we'll mention it here now, that the number of ahadith in the book as-Sunan, he has mentioned this in his Risala, in his treatise to the people of Makkah, they are 4,800 in number. He himself has mentioned that the number of ahadith in his book as-Sunan are 4,800 in number. So from 500,000 ahadith that he has written from his own hand. And of course he has ahadith, other ahadith that he would have memorized, other scrolls, other books that he has not written from his own hand. So just from 500,000 he has written from his own hands, and the other ahadith he only extracted 4,800 ahadith, only selected 4,800 ahadith for this book as-Sunan. As far as the name of the book, then it is simply as-Sunan. Imam Abu Dawud, in his treatise to Ahl Makkah, he has mentioned this book as only as as-Sunan. So this is different than what we have known from Imam Bukhari, rahimahullah, and Imam Muslim, where they have long titles in which they have mentioned the conditions that they have followed in their books and the methodology. Here we only have the word as-Sunan. But even from this word we can derive some aspects that relate to his methodology and the conditions of his book. So the most important thing is that, as we said, the Kutub as-Sunan, the books of Sunan, only contain ahadith that pertain to al-Ahkam, al-Fiqh, jurisprudence. So they do not have ahadith that relate to the biography of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for example, or the virtues of the Sahaba, for example, or a tafsir, for example, or that will relates to the science of the hereafter, or the end of times, for example. These books only contain ahadith that relate to jurisprudence. So this is one thing we can derive from this title. And he has explicitly stated in his treatise to the people of Makkah that I have only compiled books that relate to al-Ahkam, that relate to fiqh, and I have not compiled books that relate to Fadail al-Amal, al-Zuhud, and other than them. These issues and matters that relate to other than Ahkam, I have not included these ahadith in my book. Also, from this title as-Sunan, we can derive another condition or methodology of his, which is that he has gathered only the marfu ahadith, those ahadith that end or that are ascribed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He has not mentioned mawqufat, the athar of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. How can we derive this from the word as-Sunan? How can we derive this from the word as-Sunan? Sunnah. Ahsantum. The Sunnah, in most instances when it is said, it refers to the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, something that is marfu to him, that is ascribed to him. And from the proofs of that is that you have several ahadith in which the Sahabi will narrate a hadith. Qala Abu Huraira radiyallahu anhu, and he will narrate a hadith. There is no mention of Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in this hadith. But at the end or at the beginning he will say, wa min as-sunnati kadha. From the sunnah is to do such and such. There is no mention of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam like in other hadith. Qala Abu Huraira, qala Rasulullah. Qala Abu Huraira min as-sunnati, to do this. So the ulama, all of them are united, the scholars of hadith, that these ahadith are marfu. They are ascribed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because the Sahabi does not say that from the sunnah is something except that he means the sunnah of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is why we can derive from this word as-Sunan that he will try to only mention marfu ahadith, and this is the reality. Sunan Abi Dawud has very rare mawqufat, athar on the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. The vast majority of the ahadith in Sunan Abi Dawud are marfu, ascribed to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he has another, and as we said, for the Sunan we have a book, a great treatise that he wrote to the people of Makkah explaining his Sunans. We can always refer back to it. So he himself has stated this in this treatise also. And he has stated a very beautiful thing that I want to emphasize here. He says that in praise of his book, when he is explaining his book to the people of Makkah, he writes in praise of his book that if a person was to have the Quran, the book of Allah, with him, and he had my book, then he would not need any book after it. If he had the book of Allah, the Quran, and then he had my book, then he would not need any book after it. And this is a great praise from him on his book. And he is deserving of this praise. And to say such praise upon his book, the vast travels and the hardships that he endured collecting this book. So these muhaddithin are deserving of praising their works, their literal works in this manner. But he says after this, وَيُعْجِبُنِي أَنْ يَكْتُبَ الرَّجُلُ مَعَ هَذِهِ الْكُتُبِ الْوَارِدَ فِي السُّنَنِ مِنْ رَأْيِ أَصْحَابِ النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم. After saying that if a person had the book of Allah and my book, he would not be in need of any other book. He says that even with this, I highly recommend, and it is preferable, that along with this, a person gathers the athar of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhu. And I say this because this shows that the way of the scholars of hadith, the Ahle-Hadith, is to refer back to the understanding of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum ajma'in in implementing these texts of the Quran and the Sunnah. They are not left to the intellect of a person or intellect of so-and-so. These texts of the Quran and the Sunnah, they are to be understood and implemented as the Sahaba understood them and implemented them. Now,
they say that Sunan Ibn Majah contains the most weakest of the hadiths.
No.
Is it true?
We will come to it inshallah. When we come to Sunan Ibn Majah, we'll talk about it.
So when you say gather the asar of Sahaba,
Now,
what do you mean? Like, is it in a separate book that you refer to learn?
no, of course he's talking to the scholars of hadith of that time. The scholars of hadith who were alive at that, the major scholars in Mecca. So he's saying that even if you were to have my book, keep striving and gathering and listening and collecting the athar of the Sahaba. And of course the scholars have gathered the athar of the Sahaba in separate books. There are books in which you will find the athar of the Sahaba in huge, vast numbers. From these books are al-Musannafat. We talked yesterday about al-Masanid. We talked about al-Jawami'. Now we talked about al-Sunan, al-Sihah. We will also mention, Jazakumullah khair, al-Musannafat. From the types of books of hadith are books that are called Musannaf. And these are early books. The scholars of hadith authored them, like from the first books they compiled were the books of Musannafat. From the most famous of them is Musannaf Abdul Razzaq al-San'ani. Musannaf Abdul Razzaq al-San'ani, who passed away in 211 after the Hijrah. From the teachers of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, who he traveled to hear hadith from in Yemen. After that is the book Musannaf Ibn Abi Shayba, that is behind us here. Musannaf Ibn Abi Shayba, that we said is a sheikh and teacher of who? Imam Muslim. We mentioned that yesterday. Musannaf Ibn Abi Shayba, who passed away in the year 235. So in these books, this book Musannaf Ibn Abi Shayba, this vast book, you will find thousands and thousands of athar of the Sahaba and the Tabi'in. Because the Musannaf is a book in which the Muhaddithin collected the athar of the Sahaba and the Tabi'in. So if anyone wants to refer to the fiqh and faham of the Sahaba and the Tabi'in, then he should refer back to the books of al-Musannafat, the Musannafat.
How many volumes is a production?
I mean, it is less in number, it's 11 in number. The oldest edition is 11 in number. One of the scholars of India, Habibur Rahman al-Azami, he is the one who published it several decades ago. So, this is regarding the athar of the Sahaba and the Tabi'in. Also, we want to mention regarding the methodology of Imam Abi Dawud and his condition in this book. As he has mentioned in his treatise to Ahlul Makkah, he says that I have tried to do istiqsa, to gather all the ahadith that are related to al-ahkam and fiqh. Gather all the ahadith that are related to al-ahkam and jurisprudence. But we have to mention a very important point here, that he does not mean by this that he has gathered or he does not mean by this that which is apparent from this statement, that he has gathered all the ahadith of ahkam and in fiqh. Rather, he means that he has gathered the usul of this ahadith, the foundations of this ahadith. As we mentioned, that ahadith near the muhaddithin, the text, if it is narrated by 5 sahaba, it is considered 5 ahadith. If the sahabi, 5 sahaba heard this hadith and narrated it, it is considered 5 hadith, even though the text is the same. So he has only mentioned in the book as-Sunan 1 from these 5, for example. The foundation, the main text of this hadith on one of the sahaba. This hadith could have been narrated by 10 sahaba, but he has only mentioned it on one of them. So this is what he means, that I have gathered all of the ahadith related to ahkam, that he has gathered the usul, the foundations of these ahadith that relate to fiqh and ahkam. Understood? So this is from his methodology, and he explicitly states this in his treatise to the people of Mecca, that I have gathered or mentioned 1 or 2 hadith from a lot of ahadith that relate to that chapter, and that hukum, that issue of fiqh. He might have several ahadith that he mentions. I have only mentioned 1 or 2 hadiths from these several ahadith that I have with me that are authentic, that he has with him, that he has memorized, written, that are authentic. But he only mentioned 1 or 2 from these many ahadith in that chapter, because he wanted al-ikhtisar. He wanted a summarized, concise book. He wanted al-ikhtisar. And from the methodologies of Imam Abu Dawud rahimahullah is that he did not repeat a hadith except, as we said for Imam al-Bukhari, except with added benefit. He did not repeat a hadith except with added benefit. Either in the isnad of this hadith, it is upon another narrator, or that narrator has narrated on someone else, or in the text of this hadith, that it has additional words, different words. So he has not repeated a hadith except with added benefit. And as we said, this is the way of the muhaddithin. They do not like to repeat anything in which there is no benefit. They dislike repeating something that has no benefit. So they always, from their methodology, was to have added benefit in the isnad or the text until they repeated this hadith if they needed it in another chapter of fiqh. Also from his methodologies that he mentioned in this treatise to people of Mecca, that if a hadith is a long hadith, if the hadith is a long hadith that contains several sentences and several issues, he summarized and concised this hadith just to that part or that sentence that relates to that chapter that he is mentioning this hadith in. A hadith can contain several rulings from Prophet Muhammad regarding several issues. So if he mentions this hadith in one of the chapters of the fiqh, he would just consign or summarize it to just that part or that sentence. This is also the methodology of Imam Bukhari that we mentioned, that he would concise the hadith just to the part that pertains to that chapter, and he would do taqti of the hadith. He would break up the hadith. Every part he would mention it in the chapter that it relates to. One long hadith, he would break it up and mention every part in the chapter that it is related to. So Imam Abu Dawud, from his methodology, is the same methodology, that he would concise the long hadith and only mention the part that pertains to that chapter.
If it's called ملخص, or how would you say it?
Ikhtisar. No. And why did he do this? To train the student of knowledge on istinbat, how to derive rulings of jurisprudence from the text of the sunnah. when a person looks at the heading chapter and then he looks at the concise text, he will understand what is the link between this ruling and the text. And this will train him on to the way of the scholars in deriving rulings from these ahadith. So this is from the ways of Sunan Abi Dawud in his book, of Imam Abu Dawud in his book as-Sunan. Regarding the number of ahadith in his book, then we mentioned, he himself has mentioned in the treatise to the people of Mecca that there are 4,800 in number. But the Sunan Abi Dawud that has been published, give and take the difference in numbers, there are almost 5,000 ahadith in the published version of Sunan Abi Dawud. And he mentioned there are 4,800 ahadith. And this is not something that is problematic or something of concern, because from the ways of the Arab was that they would round up the number, make it a round figure. This was well known from the Arabs. From past times, they would round the number. So 4,800 round to 5,000. Or maybe it can be because of the ahadith of mukarrara. Maybe he mentioned the ahadith that are not repeated. And of course, those who print these books, they number every isnad and every hadith with a separate number. So it's a small difference that is not anything problematic. Now we'll compare Sunan Abi Dawud with the two books that have passed, Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, to show what ways he's similar to Imam al-Bukhari and what ways he's different, what ways he's similar to Imam Muslim and in what ways he's different. From the ways of Imam Abu Dawud that he's similar to Imam al-Bukhari is his importance to jurisprudence and fiqh. As we said, Imam Bukhari gave great care to the tabwibat, the chapter headings of his Sahih, and his fiqh is present in the chapter headings. Similar is the case of Imam Abu Dawud. And as we said, he did not author this book except for ahkam and jurisprudence of fiqh. Rather, he is the first person who has gathered only ahadith of ahkam in a single book. As we said, Imam Bukhari is the first person who has gathered only authentic ahadith in one book. Those before him gathered authentic ahadith along with non-authentic ahadith. He is the first person who has gathered only authentic ahadith. So Sunan Abi Dawud, similarly, he is the first muhaddith and scholar who has gathered only ahadith of ahkam in a book. Those before him used to gather along with ahkam other ahadith. So he's the first person to start this trend of authoring by gathering only ahadith of al-ahkam. And this is the reason, the brother asked yesterday, this is the reason that you will find all types of ahadith in Sunan Abi Dawud, meaning authentic and non-authentic ahadith, Sahih, Hasan and Da'if ahadith. Because he did not, or from his conditions was not to just gather authentic ahadith like Bukhari and Muslim. From his conditions was to gather the usul, the foundational ahadith of al-ahkam, of jurisprudence, regardless if they were authentic or non-authentic. Because these are the books, these are the ahadith that the fuqaha, the jurists use in their rulings. The jurists use in their rulings. So he did not have a condition that he would only gather or mention authentic ahadith. He gathered all types of ahadith, Sahih, Hasan and Da'if. And we will mention that in detail inshallah in the coming sentences. Some of the scholars have mentioned some mawdu' ahadith in Sunan Abi Dawud, and there can be discussion around it. Like Imam Ibn al-Jawzi, he has a very well-known famous book, al-Mawdu'at, in which he has gathered only the mawdu' ahadith, the made-up, false ahadith. But the scholars, they have discussed this book in detail, and a lot of the ahadith that he has mentioned in al-Mawdu'at are not truly mawdu'at. They are not to be deemed false made-up ahadith. So, but the scholars have mentioned there are some mawdu ahadith in Sunan Abi Dawud, even though they're very rare and very little in number. This is how he's similar to Imam al-Bukhari. As far as being similar to Imam Muslim rahimahullah, then it is by way of gathering the text of a hadith and the various words of a hadith in a single place. As we said, this is something that Imam Muslim rahimahullah was known for, and it distinguished him, that he gathered the various words of the hadith in a single place, the various chains of narration in a single place. In difference to Imam al-Bukhari, who would repeat the hadith and only mention parts of hadith, splitting it up in the different chapters. But Imam Muslim gathered the hadith and its various words and chains of narration in one place. So similarly, Abu Dawud, he gathers the various words that are mentioned in the various chains of narrations of a single hadith in a single place. So in this way, he is similar to Imam Muslim. And we said this is proof of the great diqqah of Imam Muslim, the great attention to detail and preciseness of Imam Muslim. And we said this is something that the scholars have mentioned as something that is in which Imam Muslim has surpassed Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah, that he gives great attention and preciseness to this issue of mentioning all the words of a hadith and the chains of narration in one place. And we said there's a reason for this, is because Imam Muslim authored his Sahih in the comfort of his home, where all his scrolls and books and the scholars were around him. So he could take the time to do that, while Imam Bukhari used to author while he was in his travels, and he was in travels and tested until his death, rahimahullah. From the preciseness, I want to explicitly mention this so that people can understand the great integrity of these scholars of hadith. The people today talk about how they were men just like us. They could have forgotten, they could have gotten mistaken, they could have done this, they could have done that. I'll mention a few examples from Sunan Abi Dawud that show the great integrity and the attention to detail and preciseness these muhaddithin had. So from it is that if he heard a hadith from his teacher and his shaykh, the shaykh was narrating a hadith upon the students and they would write or memorize. If he heard a hadith and for some reason one word he did not hear in between this hadith, between this hadith, one word slipped him, he could not hear it properly, for whatever reason he could not hear one word from this hadith. So you will find several examples of Sunan Abi Dawud when he will say after narrating the hadith, wa kalima lam asma'ha, and this word I did not hear. You will find several hadiths in Sunan Abi Dawud, he'll mention after narrating the hadith, and this word I did not hear. Of course, he took it from the scrolls or the books of this muhaddith when he returned back to him. He took it from his sources. But to show that he did not hear this word from his mouth, he would mention this detail, that I did not hear this word. Even though writing from the scroll is an acceptable way of narration. The ways of narration are several. Hearing the word of the shaykh, which is called as-sama'. Reading upon the shaykh and hearing this reading, the other students hearing this reading. This is called al-ard, al-qira'ah al-shaykh. From them is al-ijaza. The shaykh gives permission to his student to narrate the hadith and his books. So this is an acceptable way of narrating hadith. That Imam Abu Dawud goes to the source of the shaykh, the book, and he writes this word from his book. But even with that, he would say that I heard this hadith except this one word. From the examples of the precision of the muhaddithin, if he did not hear a word properly and he heard one of the students who was along with him, and these are students who were a'imma, muhaddithin, huffaz, kibar. These were the great scholars of hadith and memorizers of that time. So he would ask one of them, what did the shaykh say? If a word slipped him, he could not hear it, properly, he would ask one of the students next to him, what did the Shaykh say? And when he narrated this hadith, there are several examples in Sunan Abi Dawud, he would say, إِلَّا كَذَا فَقَدْ ثَبَّتَنِي فِيهَا فُلَانِ ibn fulan. When he narrated this hadith, he would say at the end, except for this word, for I referred to so and so regarding this word, and this is how he told me this word is. Even by his name he would mention it, that I referred back to one of the students beside me who was so and so, and this is how he read it upon me. The precision of this muhaddithin, it is something that only the people who read these books and study these books, they can understand. This is how the sunnah came to us, preserved with this integrity and this high level of attention to detail. Also from the examples, and this is a very great example, from his teachers of Sunan Abi Dawud was a great muhaddith and scholar by the name of Al-Harith ibn Miskin. Al-Harith ibn Miskin. And some of the scholars of hadith, they were very hard in narrating hadith. They did not narrate hadith to everybody. They did not narrate hadith to everybody who came to them. They were very strict. They only narrated hadith for a select group of students with hardship. They did not give hadith freely, giving it to everybody. So from them was Al-Harith ibn Miskin. He was very harsh and strict in narrating. He would not narrate except to a specific group of people. So Imam Abu Dawud came to him, asked him to read hadith upon him, to narrate from him. He refused. He refused. So the muhaddithin, the Ahlul Hadith, the students of hadith would not leave this muhaddithin. They found other ways to hear from him. They found other ways to hear from him so that they do not miss out on their hadith. So he sat in a place that the muhaddith Al-Harith ibn Miskin could not see him. And he heard the hadith that he's reciting to that select group of students that were in front of him, and he was hearing. And he was writing this ahadith. And he was writing these ahadith. These ahadith, some of them he has mentioned in his book, As-Sunan, on Al-Harith ibn Miskin. And from the detail and the integrity of these scholars of hadith, Imam Abu Dawud and other, he says, after narrating the hadith, قُرِيَ عَلَيْهِ وَأَنَا الشَّاهِدُ. He could have said, Haddathana, he narrated, and that was the end of it. Could he not? He was narrating, and he heard it. But he said that it was read upon him, and I was hearing. To differentiate, to show that he did not, he heard it, but he did not hear it because the Shaykh did not mean him to hear it. So this is some of the stories, and there are hundreds of stories like this of the muhaddithin, their integrity and their precision in preserving the sunnah, and why this isnad and this science of hadith is the reason that this deen is preserved until this day and will remain preserved until the end of times. And this is something that no other nation before us, no other nation before us has this precision. Should we take a break? We'll take a break inshallah, and we'll continue after the break inshallah. If there are any questions, I guess after the break inshallah.